morning, everyone. Welcome to the Muscatine County Board of Supervisors meeting for Monday, October 14th, 2019. I will call the meeting to order, and our first item of business is to review the agenda.
Move to approve as presented. Second.
Jeff has moved, Santos has seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Motion approved. Item number 3, receive comments from the public. Here we open the meeting up to anyone from the public wishing to comment on an item that's not already on our agenda. I don't believe we have anybody who is in that position, so we'll move right along. Item number 4, I understand, was going to be discussions regarding the county attorney and the sheriff with Mr. Kyle Kurtz. But Kyle has informed us he's not appearing today, and I guess is not. How did you put it, Nancy?
He does not intend to pursue the investigation of the sheriff.
Okay, so we will move right along to item number 5, items with County Engineer Keith White. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
First item I had was letting information on the Salisbury Road flood repairs. Should have had a copy in your packet. If anybody needs one. We got one. Anyway, as you can see, Bronze Excavating was the red low, and we received a bid from Hire, and then we had one other bid that did not make it on time, so it was not red. It went to the city instead of us. So I would recommend that we award the bid to Bronze Excavating of Muscatine, Iowa.
I'll make the motion we accept the bid from Bronze Excavating.
Jeff has moved, Santos has seconded. Any discussion? We thank those who did bid. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Bronze Excavating is awarded the bid.
Next on projects update, really only a couple changes in the construction world is the box culvert for the bridge replacement on North Isett was, the majority of the work was completed and open to traffic last week. We still have temporary seeding to happen because we're past the seeding dates. So temporary seeding will be happening. But anyway, that road's open, a pretty good looking job. And then on 155th Street, the rest of the culvert had been poured to get another bridge replacement, and they've started backfilling, and they plan to continue that work this week. And Bayfield Road, which was a patch repair, the Hilla was supposed to be in later this week. We thought we'd see them in the last week, but they had a couple rain delays, so they should be in later this week to finish that. On the design side, really no change, just a reminder that the 231st G28 project goes to letting November 19th, as does Bridge 163, which is up on 120th Street.
Keith, I have a little bit of a question on 231st. The main that, did you get through the issue with the main?
Yeah, I think you were maybe not here last week when I reported on that. Bridgestone Bandag decided to abandon the main, cap it off back down by Lutheran Home.
That's the 10-inch or?
Yes, that's the 10-inch, and it's really the one that was of greater concern to us. So that was good news.
Yeah.
And Keith, the project you mentioned on Bayfield, is that, I know there's, just from where I drive on it, there's that soft spot that's had barricade.
Yes, east of Tipton, that's correct.
That's what it's gonna address, that area as well.
It's gonna address that area, specifically that point right there, but also extending beyond it either way.
Okay, great, yeah, there's some issues.
Is that the only one, or is there also another, or you did a repair up by ice it in Bayfield.
Yeah.
The county did that yourself.
Yeah, nice.
Keith, I got a question on Bayfield as well too. That's just seal coated, correct?
Yes.
When did we put that in? When did we go to seal? When did we go from gravel to seal coat on that?
I'm going to, I'm trying to place it by board members. I'm gonna say 10 years ago.
Not quite that far, I'm gonna say, yeah, close, 8, 10.
10 years ago.
I was on the board then, so, yeah.
Well, I remember a board member that said, you know, why haven't we done this? And I'm like, I brought this up when I first moved here. And you all, which was none of you, said no. That's why we haven't done it. So, yeah, I could look it up exactly.
No, and then I'm just asking, just in regards to just thinking of, you know, life cycles of what we're thinking. Is that gonna be a 20-year replacement, so we'll be seeing it in another 10 years, or?
Well, we started a little history, and I'll try and be brief, on Elder up by West Liberty, Elder South, when the one subdivision went out there and the developer paid for, our office was recommending paving, the board and the developer decided that seal coat was sufficient. And so that's what was constructed up there, and it was with the intent that we would get an asphalt overlay on that down the road, which we did, and that's the construction process that we have used on those. The other one that same time frame here would have been north of the city golf course on 180th, where we add millings and it's injected with asphalt emulsion and makes a good, we've had really good success with building roads like that, with the intent that they get an overlay down the road, just like North Isaac received. So, and like I said, we've had good success with that.
So it's a several-year process, though, to build that base
Yes.
before you go to the asphalt overlay.
So you wouldn't normally go in and take the seal coat out?
No.
You'd leave that in, and that would be part
Go right
of your
over the
base to
top.
go on top?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's all I have, thank you.
Sure. On other I had, we have been notified by FEMA, we have about 7 projects, I'm going to say, out of the current disaster. Not all of the road departments, a couple of them are conservations. One Eric's dealing with on the demolition. So I take it back, I think maybe there's 8, and so we have 5, but we have received notice that one of ours has been approved so far, which is good news. But in talking to the FEMA representative, I was asking, fine, when will we see the money? And the answer I got did not seem correct to me, which was when everything's done, all the, and going, is that a change? Because it's not. And so I called the state, the deputy director at the state said, no, it's just like always, that they'll see the money from FEMA probably this week, and they turn it around right away, so we should see funds on that first project, which happens to include Salisbury here, which is a good thing. We should see that fairly right away. They send you 75% of the federal share. The federal share is 75%. They send you that. They send it to the state. The state sends it to us. When everything is done and audited and that, the state provides another 5% of the state funds. So that's the way it's been as long as I can remember, and then the state says it's still that way. So we should know within a week or 2 here if a check arrives, it's still that way. Because I'm just going, what if it was like 08 and we had millions to front, and not tens of thousands? And but also bear in mind going forward on some of these, you know, we still have skin in the game. And, you know, I think Eric's probably gonna at some point talk to you about his stuff too, of how many county dollars you wanna commit, so.
Cause these are reimbursement dollars, right? We pretty much have to do the work already,
Well,
or shore it up somewhat.
If they fall in their category of small projects, which these all happen to, they give you the money up front. You settle up at the end on actuals. And that's all I had, pending any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Moving on along, to item number 6, it's discussion and possible decision on the requested first half of the FY 1920 transfer payment of $155,638 to the Eastern Iowa Mental Health Disability Services Region. I've asked David Farmer and Lynn Bopes from the region to come here to answer our questions and tell us a little bit about the region's finances. Just to give everybody a background, the region has budgeted transfer payments to be paid by each county, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million for the entire region, split up on a per capita basis, which makes Muscatine share $311,000 roughly, and this would be the first of 2 semi-annual installments. So again, we've asked David, he's got a presentation ready for us. It's a pretty hot bench here, so you may get interrupted with questions, but I know you can handle it.
Thank you. I did print out some handouts of the PowerPoint. I apologize I didn't get to me earlier about town last week working on an engagement for Scott County.
Do we get the PowerPoint mailed out to everybody?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is what you sent over on Friday?
This is what I sent over on Friday.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. So thank you for the invitation. Again, I'm David Farmer. I'm the Director of Budget and Administrative Services for Scott County. Scott County is the fiscal agent for the Eastern Iowa Mental Health Region. Again, the Eastern Iowa Mental Health Region is Scott, Cedar, Jackson, Muscatine, Clinton counties. Quite a breadth of Eastern Iowa here that we work together for mental health services. The original request said financial position for the region. And so what I've pulled together here is this gonna work? Yeah. A little brief history, some analysis of the fund balance of the region, the fiscal 20 budget perspective, cash flow projection moving forward as we look forward into fiscal 20 and perhaps fiscal 21. And really, I'm trying to move away from the word cash flow. I'm trying to move more into the word fund flow, because really I'm looking at fund balance. I'm not looking necessarily at cash position of the region. And that we'll see how that plays here in a little bit. Some key legislative points, which is really there's one point that we're focusing on anytime we have communications with our state legislators, our partners in the state. There's just one main point that we're moving forward with right now. And then questions. But as you said, if there's something on a slide that you want to touch upon in a little bit more detail, I'll be happy to stop and discuss that a little bit at that time. So the history of the region is that all 5 counties were approved the 28E agreement in March of 2014. So that means the first fiscal year of the region was fiscal year 15, July 1, 2014 through June 30, 15. So we were wrapping up about 5 years worth of activity now. The region formed at that time. It was primarily funded through property tax dollars. For fiscal 15, there were still what's called state equalization dollars. State equalization dollars was part of the old formula that helped bring dollars down from the state and equalize the funding services for mental health services throughout each region. Primary receivers that were credited for mental health, were credited with equalization dollars for Scott County and Jackson County. We have a funding model of 6 buckets, which is the 5 individual counties plus the regional fiscal agent fund. The regional fiscal agent fund kind of works as an overlay of the region. And it's really used to pay for joint services, including these region-wide services that are crisis in nature, that cannot be attributed just to one county or the other. Also, we're attributing administrative costs as well. What we kept within each of the individual buckets was the traditional services that each county pays for and has been paying for on a first-hand basis for a number of years. And then also local administrative costs, such as your local administrator. These region-wide services that the Fiscal Agent Fund addresses hits upon all these here: crisis hotline, mobile crisis evaluation, peer drop-in centers, trauma-informed care training, crisis intervention. All these came in on different levels, different speeds of activity and different volume, and have been building up through our contract with Robert Young Center as our primary contractor to develop these services. We've been praised from the state for the way how we took time early on in 2015 to look at how we can best apply these services. And that played a factor in how we came into our funding model that we are right now. Through the original funding model, the state said, we want to look at your 2015 expenditures and we're going to lock in those expenditures, and that's what develops your per capita funding. So we'll come back to that here in a couple minutes, but that was very significant in SF 504, which changed that per capita funding level. And because we, the region, were a little bit slower in developing some of these services in fiscal 15-16, it hampered us now in fiscal 19 and 20. Okay? And we'll see that on the graph here on the tail end of the presentation. So the funding model of the region, 28E agreement. So there, as I said, there is a 28E agreement, and it's focused on there's only one section, section 7, that is focused on management and expenditure funding. This is pretty much word for word out of the agreement. In the middle of there, it does say revenues in excess of a county's projected service and required fund balance levels shall be deposited into a regional pool account. That was the way how we built it as a first place. If you notice in this section here, there's nothing in here that states what percentage of fund balance. Anytime the percentage of fund balance was applied to an individual county, it was applied based upon our understanding of state code at that time. Okay? And so that changing percentage within each of our 5 buckets was dependent on state code. That state code has ranged from 20% for some smaller counties, 25% for the larger counties, and eventually moved up to 40% through the most recent legislation. At one time, we only applied that fund balance percentage only to counties and not to the fiscal agent fund. SF 504 changed that and said we have to now apply that fiscal fund balance to each of our, that's in our fiscal agent fund, to each of our member counties. So if we take a look at the financial history of revenues here, overall we've brought in $58.2 million over the past 6.5 years. Almost $7 million came from your fund balance that you carried in from fiscal 14. And then we can see that the high point was fiscal 15 to $16 million revenues. This is before the legislation came in play. It was before the SF 504. It was before we still received equalization dollars, which is about $4.2 million in fiscal 15. Okay.
So of that 16, David, about 4.2 was the equalization?
Yes, it was.
And you said those dollars are spread in the Scott County and Jackson County
Correct.
numbers?
Yes.
Do you know how that splits out?
It was about 4.1 and $100,000.
Okay.
So that's what the Scott County number is so big there in 2015.
Yes.
You got your county equalization dollars received there.
Yes. That was if Scott County's tax levy was higher, we would not have received the same amount of equalization dollars.
Correct. Okay.
So this is a chart of what I would term it as external revenues, not from any of our other members outside of the state attributable to one county or the other. You see fiscal 16-17 was our revenue stream was about $9 million. Fiscal 18 we dropped to about 7.8, so that was a starting of a conscious effort to start to draw down fund balance. In order to draw down fund balance, you have 2 options. You can increase your expenditures, or decrease your revenue stream. And so by fiscal 18, through communications with the state, as far as the growing amount of fund balance statewide, not just in one region or the other, the region started to make that choice in order to lower their revenues in order to start to draw down that fund balance. Fiscal 19, we again see that effect there of cutting, the region cut their revenues to about $4.7 million. Again, most of that money was in with Scott County. Scott County raised their tax levy in that year. The other 4 counties lowered their levy to $0 in order to meet state code at that time, which at that time was to reach 20% fund balance by fiscal year June 2020. Some of you may recall that we did have an all-group region meeting about, was that two and a half years ago?
Yes.
I don't think it was 3.
No.
2.
2 years.
Yeah,
That we projected at that time a 3-year funding model at that time in order to reach fund balance of 20% by June 30, 2020. And then I have the first 2 months for fiscal 20 there. So far we've received about $3.5 million. You see 2 months there, August and September. I have not received Muscatine's data for September or Jackson County's, and so we have an incomplete picture of what we're at right now as of September 30th. Overall, percentage of revenues from outside revenues, Scott County's provided 49%, rounded. Muscatine 18%, Jackson County 6%, Clinton County 18%, Cedar County 7%, and we had 1.27% from outside of any of the 5 counties. The state did provide a $500,000 grant back in fiscal 17, as well as interest income that we received.
Where's that grant allocated up there?
It's in that fiscal agent column, that $531,000 in fiscal 17.
Got it, so that wasn't, was that what we generally refer to as equalization dollars
No.
at that time? Okay.
No, that was a grant that was specifically provided through SF 504
Mhm.
to,
Good.
hey, we'd like you to stay a region, and so we're gonna provide some funding incentive for you to stay a region. On the expenditure side of the equation, we spent about $53.4 million since July 1, 2014. You can see there, we've been very consistent for the first 4 fiscal years, roughly between $8.5 and $9 million, or almost up to $10 million in that first fiscal year. Okay? That $9.9 million is significant there for fiscal 15. When the state studied SF 504 and applied that, they reset that per capita funding level from 4728 down to a per capita level and across the entire statewide. That's what dropped our per capita funding down to $30.28, 68, about $30. Yeah, $30.78 per capita. That per capita funding is driven by each county. Your county population says you can only generate your population times that per capita, and that is equal to your property tax dollars. And so, because our spending in fiscal 15 was only about $9.9 million, the state did a little bit of reconciliation to back out some ACA funding and return of funds, which dropped us to a maximum levy of $9.2 million. Okay, that is a contributing factor of how we got into this situation.
9.2, you said?
About 9.2. You look at fiscal 19, we are at $12.8 million. There was a board decision in order to try and meet fiscal year 2020, 20% fund balance, to increase their spending. Again, I referenced how do we reach a fund balance perspective. We decrease revenues, we increase expenditures. Fiscal 19 had both of those perspectives. The board approved in July or August of 2018 about $1.3 million in one-time funding to a number of providers across the entire region in order to build services for future utilizers that would be more cost efficient than what they are right now.
And that's reflected in the 448 on the fiscal agent expenditure in 19?
Yes, that is correct.
So the 16 and 18 expenditures of the like 16, 17, what drove those?
So that is part of our contract with Robert Young Center, who is the contract holder for a number of our region-wide crisis services.
So
Okay?
that was the Robert Young contract?
That is approximately the Robert Young contract. And so you do see a larger jump. So even if we take that 4.4 and pull out $1.3 million of that one-time funding, That still puts the Robert Young contract less than administrative cost right around $3 million, well, right around $3 million. Why has that been going up in each of the years? Because the system has started to work as designed. We've had higher utilization, increased services, plus a number of new services put on by the state that we've also started to implement that is driving up that increased cost. And so that cost of about $3 million has been higher than what we originally anticipated for the year. It is perfectly within the contract. We just didn't fully expect that utilization to ramp up so quickly.
And we haven't seen any offset in other services.
Oh, we have, but I'm not the one to necessarily speak to what those offsets were.
So it could be a transfer to fiscal agent costs, which should come out of expenditures theoretically within the counties
And
themselves.
the biggest one in theory is if we're, the crisis services is keeping people out of the hospitals.
Right.
If someone goes to the hospital, then it becomes less of a crisis-wide service, and becomes more of a county service. And then, so that's where you're feeling that increased cost on your individual counties. And so as I understand it, the better the way we can address these crises is if we can cut them off early, provide the crisis services early on, then they're not being served in a hospital situation, which then comes back to the county tax levy directly. The other aspect that's been, and I didn't highlight this too much, but this has been a changing world. The ACA Act has changed the amount of individuals with insurance. A lot of counties still address their funding for individuals that do not have insurance. But there was a time period there between 16, 17, 18 where individuals with insurance did increase, thus deferring a lot of these costs from us, which makes it very difficult for us to budget in the future. You see there the percentage of services over the 6.5 years, or 5.5 years. 18%, almost 19% for the fiscal agent fund, 4.5% for Cedar, Clinton 15.3, Jackson 3.85, Muscatine County almost 14 6/10, and Scott County 42.9%. Okay. If we look here, and again, I mentioned the fiscal agent expenditures there are for crisis administrative services. We already discussed the one-time grants. The services for the fiscal agent fund are not really easily tied to one county or other. These contracts are region-wide. It's for a telephone line. It's for a number of different services. And some of these services came in at different speeds. Some of the contracts with individual hospitals were done earlier on than if their other corresponding counties. So if we take that 18.79% and allocate that back out across the 5 counties, and if we just do it based upon a population, there, and you see that on that bottom row. So then we add in that 18.79% across to the other 5 counties based on their county of service. And that's a total approximation. I don't have any other numbers besides to back that up. It's an allocation. Okay. You see that the recalculated percentage is Cedar County at 5.68, Clinton 18.29, Jackson at 5.06, Muscatine 17.31, and Scott at 53.67. So if we compare that to the population here, we do have some variances that we are aware of. Different counties have been receiving a different level of service based upon their population. So then let's talk, we talked about the revenues, which are the inflows, we talked about the expenditures on the outflows. Where does that really leave us on fund balance? Fiscal 15 and 16, 17, 18. We were all around that $12 to $13 million level of fund balance. We knew in the horizon that we had to reach a 20% fund level, and this was based on the legislation of SF 504 by June 30, 2020. That's next June. Okay. When we develop our budgets, or such as determining what level of property taxes to levy, or depending what expenditure level, it was always with the goal of reaching 20% of fund balance by June 30, 2020.
When did that change?
That changed with SF 504. So that was after.
No, I mean to the 40% level.
That changed this past legislation session after all of our budgets have been adopted.
Okay, so it changed in calendar year 2019.
Correct.
Gotcha.
And so that's what I have in the margins there, the notes 1, 2, and 3. The first two fiscal years, we were looking at 20 and 25% on the county level, but the fiscal agent could be uncapped. And then they put in the SF 504, and then they said, we want you to be at 25% fund balance by June 30, 2020. Excuse me, I think that should be actually 20% for our region. By June 30, so then we had 2 years that we wanted to be at 20% by June 30, 2020. And then this past legislative session, after we already adopted our budgets, they said, okay, now you can be at 40% by June 30, 2022. They even gave us 2 years to kick it out. That works well for the rest of the state because the rest of the state is still trying to get down to this level. We're already down. They did not do anything to create additional funding capacity for our region, even though that was promised in the legislation session to members of our board and so forth, saying, yes, we have a solution, you'll be okay with it. That did not happen this legislative session.
So just to clarify, the change that allowed us to retain our funds up to 40% came down earlier this year.
Later.
Earlier this actual fiscal calendar.
Calendar, yes,
Yes.
earlier this calendar year.
Correct. And after we had already processed our budget for fiscal year 20. So
Yes.
so everyone understands, when we did the budgets, we were still looking at a 20% target. And that 20% target was to bite at the end on June 30th, 2020.
Correct,
Thank you.
correct. So, I know there was a question about reconciliation of fiscal agent fund. So as you see there, we've brought in $13.9 million as of August 31st, 2019 into our fiscal agent fund. We've done the bill but not received, the reference $1.2 million to our all 5 member counties. That's been billed out at the end of September but is not received, so I'm going to deduct that out for a second. Then we have fund balance returned to member counties, Clinton, Muscatine, Scott County. That fund balance was based upon that $13.9 million contributed. We, as a board, the governing board said we want to reallocate or return some of this fund balance as sitting too much in our fiscal agent fund. The state legislation has changed. It does not matter if we hold it at the fiscal agent fund level or if we push it back down to our member counties under current legislation. We're going to move that money back and forth. Okay? So we deduct out that $3.4 million. The fiscal agent fund has about $9.5 million worth of fund balance. Cumulative. Since the past 5.5 years, we've had expenditures of about $10 million. We've also had external revenues, meaning that state grant and interest income, about $700,000. And so it shows us that a fiscal agent fund balance right now of $154,000. But I would add back in that $1.2 million once that money comes back in.
What am I trying to think of? The amounts that we've we've expended on services here that we've yet to either receive bills for, yet to pay bills on. What's that amount?
For this year, for the fiscal agent fund?
Yes.
And so that's been the changing perspective. We budgeted $4 million. We have new indications that we're going to be. We did the budget amendment in September to drop about $600,000 from that contract. However, some late expenditures from the local providers into Robert Young Center have continued to push that cash flow needs back up closer to, added about $300,000 to $600,000 worth of services. And so we're kind of back where we started 2 months ago. And so we are looking at about $4 million, the cash flow perspective was 4.7. We took out $600,000 for the amendment. Now we've had increased expenditures based on the contracts. And so we're almost back at the same starting point. I have a different handout that kind of addresses that.
Sure. And the 2,183,000 and change that the region has requested in transfers or is expecting in transfers back this year. That's the amount that you got billed but not received. That's more than half of that, right?
Yes, that's about half. So I was expecting expenditures of about $3 million. And we're looking at expenditures about $4 million.
Okay.
So I'm still short
But I'm saying,
on the projections.
this bill but not received amount, that, so in that is is half the transfers requested this year, but there's something else in there as well, right?
The 1.2 million is about half the transfers.
So that would suggest transfers of 2.4 million? Cause I've got it as just over 2.1 million on that
Yeah.
spreadsheet that I got from you on, I think. Yeah, the spreadsheet I got on the 14th. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not losing $300,000 somewhere.
Scott County is budgeted at 1.2 million.
Well, I'm looking at the fiscal agent, what is it, line 5, column, R.
On the newest one,
Yes, it's got 2.183 million, which I understand is the total net transfers.
yeah, 2.1 million.
So half of that-
2.183
So half of that would be,
would be 1,100,000 or $1,090,000.
okay,
Yes.
so there's
Yep.
150 there.
I will have to go back and review that number.
Okay.
Why am I on the balance there?
Fair enough.
Yes, it does look like we're out of balance by about $150,000. Okay. So as we discussed, the impacts of House Bill 691 and how we built the fiscal 20 budget. We originally budgeted or recommended to our member boards that all 5 counties would levy the maximum of $30.78. That we would budget for the year 4 crisis services, which with Robert RYC, which is about $4.7 million cash flow. Back early in the spring and last calendar year, calendar 18, RYC was still getting up these services up to full speed. The pace of their reimbursements has increased because those services are being more fully utilized. There are staffing in the hospitals. And so that cash flow perspective has jumped as a requirement for that contract has surprised really all of us that we fully maximize these services. And so now we're having to put more of our resources towards that programming. We did not budget for access centers or intensive residential services. Those were not required to be implemented until 7/1/21, so we still had some time on that. We did not want that in our budget.
Excuse me, you mentioned that those services have increased. Do we have numbers to
Oh yeah,
verify that?
oh yeah.
You said that we went from, we didn't know what we have. Could you provide that with us as well too?
I think a good presentation on that would be, I don't have that with me, but I think we can send you our monthly board packet that goes to our governing board, which shows the different type of utilization for a number of services.
So we went from 10% to 50%?
No, we went more like from 80% to 90% roughly. Or 95%. Part of House Bill 691, or it could have been SO 504, I'm sorry, I don't recall which one, is that transfer dollars are required to be part of each county's budget. When you be paid for crisis services, we also communicated that during the budget session. Of our budget for fiscal 20, 7.7 of it is part of this what's called the core, additional core mandated or administrative services. All basically meaning you have to do these services. These are the mandated services from the state level. We have another $4.6 million that are more about services that the region has committed to continue to do, even though they fall outside of the state's mandated services. We think these are the cost-saving services, as what we said, the residential care facilities, the community support program, that help provide a bigger bang for your buck later on if these services were not in place. And at that time, we were projecting a fund balance of about $4.2 million to carry into this year. What actually happened is that we had, based upon that time, we were still having 2 counties in excess of 40% of fund balance. And we're still, at that time, we're still trying to get them down to 20%. So we had 2 counties, Cedar and Jackson, which cut their levy in half. And that reduced their revenues by about $500,000, almost $600,000. Okay. You see there that the implementation of the the 24 hours of services. So we have all positions filled, so that's why you're pushing that utilization percentage up from 80% up to 90. Crisis beds now are open. Mobile crisis beds are now available in all 5 counties. And we have 3 peer drop-in centers are now open. These are all different services that were not in effect back in fiscal 15, 16, and 17. At least not to this utilization. I bring up the fiscal 20 budget here just to show you where we're at. We proposed a $12.3 million budget and $9.2 million revenue. But our past history said that we would only spend about 80% of our budget. 4 years of past history said we underspend our budget 8/10 of the time. Okay? And so even when we rolled that percentage up to 90%, that put us at a fund balance of 9% up to a fund balance of 25%. When we built this budget, we were right on target. We've had higher utilization though. Again, our thinking at the beginning of the year is what happens if we don't make our fund balance. The state would come in and say, you individual counties would have to levy less in your tax levy in future years when we need the money more than ever. I have the fiscal 21 in there because that was from SF 504. They bumped that down to fiscal 23 with the new bill. Again, a changing landscape. Again, that was the goal at that time. Our legislative point, and I'll touch on this here in a couple minutes, is that we need a different per capita tax funding level for our region. And I'll show you how that's calculated in a second. So we did. Some of you may be aware that we did have a budget amendment as of September 23rd, 19 from the region board. Pace of services we're picking up, uncertainty of child services. That was part of House Bill 691, is that the region now had to still start incorporating children's services into our programming. But they did not give us any new funding into those services.
We haven't spent any money on that yet, right?
We have not spent any money on that yet. We need to have a coordinator in place by June 30, 2020. Local services are increasing. Late billings from state institutions and commitment costs. Those are those local dollars that the state institutions continue to bill late. They've had a billing change, that was late in billing. And so we're still getting bills from April, May, June of last fiscal year. $1.2 million was a recommended or accepted a budget amendment, which created a reduction in services for health homes, peer drop-in centers, sheltered workshops. The one-time grants where any of that unspent money was returned to the region, and then developing a waiting list for services.
How much do we think we have in late billings that are coming in? Do we have an idea?
I know Scott County, I put in $90,000 into my budget for last year.
I know our region service plan has us denying or dishonoring bills presented more than 60 days after the close of the fiscal year. Has there been any discussion of doing that?
Not at the region-wide level.
Okay. It seems that people not following the rules that we set out several years ago.
Yep.
And we're hurting for money. It seems like that
Yep.
should be an item of discussion. Especially since we've been very clear with all of our providers that they need to get their bills to us so that we can have an accurate picture. The other question I have, if you go back to that FY20 regional budget, you're saying if I'm taking this correctly, you're saying, the one, yep. So you're saying right now, assuming a 90% usage rate of our budget, we're right on target for a 25% fund balance?
That was as of February. I have an updated slide for
As
you.
of February, got it.
I have an updated slide. That was history to tell us how are we at this position right now.
Got it.
Right now, I have this, and so the first 2 columns are what we just saw on that previous slide. We amended our budget down that $1.3 million, that puts us at expenditures of roughly $11.1 million, or 18% fund balance. Again, on target for that 20%, not on target for the 40% fund balance. We estimated 90% after that amendment, so okay, that puts me at about 32%, okay? However, fund balance flow, that far right column, is the most recent projection, as of last Friday, before our region board has actually looked and assessed this yet. Expenditures are still running higher, particularly in our fiscal agent fund. And so we could end up more about 17%, which is higher than the 9 that we originally projected, budgeted, but still not anywhere near the 40% fund balance.
And with the other amendment, you're still building in the 90% usage expectation, correct?
I have not done that, but that was, I'll show you how that comes into play.
Okay.
That amendment, the fund flow balance worksheet, which I have as an additional handout if we'd like to go over, does take that into consideration. Or takes that into consideration after the fact, after each month has been incurred.
I wanna maybe revisit a question this is maybe a regional board question, but I'm trying to understand this budget above our revenue budget. And I don't know when that became a policy. Do we not have a policy on our governing board that our budgets and expenditures must match our revenues and expenditures? So we budgeted for a 20% shortfall?
Correct. Because you are trying to meet state code of a fund balance percentage. State code would force that hand there
So
in the future.
we were part of our budget, our budget, we were burning balance.
Yes,
And so some of the unanticipated levels of expenditure at the fiscal agent level is driving the increased burn in fund balance?
and local counties,
So the increased utilization of services.
yes. I would look at it as fund balance plus revenues equals expenditures, the resources available.
And do we know of those two categories, what percentage of the burn is according to which? So in our local expenditures are, that extra 20% burn we're having, how much is coming from what?
It's a strong mix. I can't place that.
Yes, is it close to 50-50 or?
Certain counties are higher with burning local dollars versus burning, our two smallest counties, Cedar and Jackson, they don't have the local services that are burning that fund balance. They're dependent on that fiscal agent fund. But the other 3 counties is a mix of it. It could be 50-50, it could be 60-40, I don't have that number offhand.
Okay.
So, just take a quick moment here, I want to come back. We proposed to burn down 9%, knowing that we would not be down there. Because our history says we never spend every dollar. We expected to be closer to 25%. But now we're trying to get back to, but now we think that 25% is not going to be the number. We're more in this 20% range. Okay.
So,
roughly 4 million.
Fund balance.
Yeah, 3.9.
Three.
3.9,
well, you've got a projected fund balance now.
I've got a projected fund balance of
1.3.
$1.9 million across all 6 buckets.
Right.
And so that raises the second question as a financial manager, do I have the money in the right buckets? We've been very concerned about not having one county's property tax dollar go directly to another county's. If it flows up to the fiscal agent fund and then flows back down, that is still it's still something to be concerned about, but it is a matter of sharing services. The one thing that I've not mentioned yet, and as I understand it, you cannot reduce a service in one county and still have it in other counties. You have to offer that same service across all 5 counties. Okay, so it becomes difficult in our budget planning to say, yes, that's costing us money here, but I still need to offer it there. And so we need to figure out how to address that.
And our region revenues, we primarily, I mean, there's other miscellaneous, but we get those in April and October from taxes.
Correct.
And that's not necessarily the fiscal agent fund, because that's dependent on transfers, but the counties themselves.
Correct.
So, and I'm looking at region expenditures, are going to be, and this is aggregate on, at least for this year, we projected in this document I got, wait, I wanna make sure I'm looking at the most recent one that I got. I think this was sent over on Friday. Region expenditures of 12.8 million budgeted, 12.9 million roughly budgeted, line 40, column B.
That was fiscal 19.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. And that's our estimates for fiscal 19, and looking at, our estimates for fiscal 20, it's 11.4.
Correct. That's the updated that's the updated analysis.
All
And
right,
so I'm not sure if everyone has that handout. I did bring extras of that.
sure, I don't know, I thought we may have sent that out.
We did send it out.
Okay. It looks
I-
like it's a legal size spreadsheet. And for instance, what I'm seeing, it projects Muscatine County as having on June 30th a balance of $127,450.
Correct. So as each, and that brings me to my next slide here. The, how's that pointing?
Yeah, they are.
The revenues there from each county is across the top row. And then I deduct out this tax levies, and so that leaves us, some miscellaneous revenues, some charges for services, for protective pay fees, other interest income, other state grants that we may not be fully, attributing to. So that leaves us about, that leaves us a monthly, or an estimate now of $9.4 million. So that estimate row there is, compared to your top row, is what I expect the revenues to be. It takes into consideration our actual from July, August, and September, and then recalculates it out. We do the same thing with the budget expenditures. All of your DOM budgets, the Department of Management budgets, okay? Budget expenditures, less the amendment, plus the contract amendment, and then less the transfer. I know Muscatine County did not budget for the transfer, however, I took it into consideration there, of $311,000. That balance there says, okay, for Muscatine County, you budgeted $1,547,000. I project you to be at $1,465,000. Scott County, we budgeted $5.3 million. I project them to be at $3.8 million of expenditures after transfers. Okay, so, or that's what we project. But then that estimate row, that very last row is what we're actually coming in. Expenses are coming in at the county level a little bit less each month than 1/12 of that amended budget. Okay. So on that legal size sheet, if you look at Muscatine County, you've had in column D, E, and F, you've had expenditures of $116,000, $110,000, and $122,000. That $122,000 is still an estimate, I'm sorry. But for the first 2 months, you had $116,000 and $110,000. Below the 1/12 average of $122,000. So you're adding to fund balance as long as expenditures continue to come in below that estimate. You roll that over to column R. Yes, I project you at $127,000 after moving $311,000 to the region. Or you could be at $400,000 if you do not make that transfer. Still above zero, still below your recommended fund balance percentage. But if we go up to the fiscal agent fund, column R, it's still sitting at negative 361, basically due to our increased contract adjustments.
Right.
And so that, the region board will have to discuss that in the near term.
So at 7.2%, that's a little under 1 month's worth of funding.
I would agree with that.
And obviously, we've gotta be able to carry from July first till September 30th, at least 3 months worth. So obviously, that's not enough to do it, so the solution, I've heard, is that we would come to the region, the fiscal agent fund, and request money from that, correct?
Correct.
And obviously, the fiscal agent fund being currently projected to be negative 361, won't have the money to transfer. So that would necessitate transfers by other counties in the region to pump up the region account so that we could withdraw from the region. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so in effect, we'd be saying to other counties, we need you guys to kick in more because we can't make payroll for a couple of months.
Not as designed as currently budgeted, correct.
So,
And they're
I mean,
contributing,
that's a huge part of our concern. I mean,
understand.
because, you know, when we, well, no, I'll reserve it. Go ahead. Work on my thoughts here.
So you've jumped to my conclusion slide here, that so we had this cash flow analysis back done before the budget amendment, and we were projected at $1.368 million, and those were the projections there. So Muscatine County was at $58,000. With the contract amendment, our budget amendments and the 2 months actual, we're projecting now about $127,000. That fiscal agent fund, at one point, it was well to the positive of negative 391, but now it's back to negative 361 because, again, some of these late billings from our partners have utilized some of those dollars, which are per contract that we will pay them. These aren't necessarily the late payments from the state or late invoices from the state. These are some of our local providers providing price and services. $1.9 million does get us, that's about 17% of fund balance across the entire region.
So basically, the only place that there's enough money is Scott County. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment. So Scott County may be requested, and I drive a fine line here because I am the director of budget there as well. I would expect the governing board to say, we'll look at all their partners and say, what can you contribute in May, June, July in order to start funding fiscal 21.
And Clinton's gonna have a similar problem, just they're gonna have only 2 months of funding in the bank under this current projection as opposed to the 1 month that we'll have, is that about right?
Potentially.
So, I mean, we'll need, just to get everybody to tax time, we would need, what's that about? 250 for Muscatine, maybe 125 for Clinton. So that's 375, and then real close to that again to just make sure the fiscal agent fund is a negative. So that's about $750,000 from Scott County or from everyone that would need to go into the fiscal agent fund to reallocate things, is that about right?
Potentially.
So, Scott County has to approve that supernumerary transfer, and then the region would have to take it and then approve the individual distributions of it.
Correct. And if you go back to that revenue slide, Scott County has not quite equaled their population percentage yet.
Mhm.
The overall revenues, we've not reached that equalization yet. Okay?
Right, and you're
And-
counting the several million that was kicked in by the state in 2015
Oh, yes.
as a Scott County
Oh, yes.
contribution.
If we didn't have that equalization dollars, I would expect Scott County levy would have been higher. But under that legislation at that time, it's not necessarily right to attribute that to the fiscal agent fund, that's more attributable to the individual counties. I would expect the governing board will get the same detailed message at their upcoming governing board and then review if there are further actions that they need to take as far as their fiscal 20 budget.
Do you anticipate recommending additional cuts yet this fiscal year?
I expect that this will be presented to the governing board and then they will have to decide what actions they would like to do.
Gotcha.
you also asked for some legislative questions. This map I've referred to a couple times. This map was developed after SF 504. SF 504 is pushed forward a statewide cap on funding of about $125 million. They then, based on that 2015 spending levels. So our region did not overspend or spend on services that were not quite ready back in 2015, that compared to the rest of the state. That pushed our spending level at $30.78 per capita based on the state's formula. If you look to the two regions to our west, here in the east central region is at $36.51 and southeast link is at $42.60. I'm not sure how similar type of services can cost 1/6 or 1/8 or almost 1/10 less here in these 5 counties as compared to our neighboring counties. Our communication to our legislators locally is it is time for this per capita tax levy to be revalued and reestimated. Put a 5-year increment on there. Revalue it every 2 years, every 3 years. I don't know. But living off of $2015 is not realistic in the time that we have all these increasing services. Unfortunately, we are in fiscal 20. We do not expect a legislation change to occur to be effective until July 1, 2020 for fiscal 21. So we are trying to stretch our dollars to get into fiscal 21. Unless the state were to offer a loan, a funding mechanism, a grant, there are still some difficult decisions for the region board. Other 28Es throughout the state mandate what the services are going to be paid. We've left those decisions based on each of those five local boards. It's not written in our 28 agreement about what each county must levy, or the direction will come from the governing board. We've left that to the 5 local partners.
David, how many other regions are in the same situation as our region? My understanding was when SF 504 came out, a number of regions chose not to abide by the law and not draw down fund balance, because really that decision in hindsight is costing us right now.
Yes, how we're being penalized for trying to meet the law on time, June 30, 2020. Other regions, there are 2 to 3 other regions, and I'm not sure which ones they're I think in the south and southwest part of the state are having some of those smaller regions there are starting to feel the same financial struggles that we are. I don't have the exact numbers, but they were also trying to meet the fund balance rule as designed by 504, and now they're starting to feel the effects as well. So our communication is to legislators is it's time to re-up the caps or revalue the caps. We could foresee that some regions, their caps would go down because the state's trying to keep the same funding level of $125 million across the entire state. Other caps could come up. There's also been talk of other funding mechanisms besides property tax dollars. But until we see what that legislation looks like, I can't put a financial projection to that at this time. The 9.2 million for our region does not work. You saw we've never been below $9.2 million. We've used fund balance, we've used outside resources, we've used a state grant. $9.2 million does not work for our region. Legislation has continued to add unfunded mandates, meaning we'd like additional services. However, additional funding mechanisms has not been provided along with that. Cutting some of our services will lead to higher expenses in other categories. I can't give you the strong example of that, but that's for Lori Elam, the CEO, to give you a little bit more clear picture on that. The region can't use fund balance every year because once fund balance is gone, it's gone. That's the position we're at right now. And then I've had a couple of one-on-one meetings with our legislators to help develop equitable funding solutions across the state, and we're looking to continue to do that. So I invite you as a county board to continue with anytime your local legislators are wanting to know what the main issues are. This is priority number one for us.
So, and this year we had some fund balance to cushion the deficit spend.
Correct.
Next year, I mean, we'll, according to this projection, we'll have about 1.9, but that really has to be kept in the bank against ongoing expenses the following year.
You could identify a fund could go negative. Again, I use the word fund balance flow rather than cash flow because I'm measuring fund equity.
Right.
You could have a fund that goes negative. It's not enjoyable by anyone. And so as that property tax comes in the fall of 2020, it could be bumping those balances back up to a minimum. Where does it?
Go I mean, where's the money come from?
Well, so
Because
fiscal.
my account can't go negative with the bank.
Not coming out from the bank, but if you have some counties apply a commingled cash balance,
Okay,
and so it's being shared by the funds,
I see.
or they develop or loans across individual funds. Again, each county's different on what that. I know the schools have interfund loan agreements as well.
Right, now, is that legal? I mean,
I know that schools have interfund loan.
no, I mean for us.
I'd have to investigate that.
Sure. But, I mean, even to just get to a revenue neutral budget, we're looking, assuming no changes, and obviously this is not sustainable under the current model. To get to a revenue neutral budget, we're looking at $3 million less.
The fiscal 21 budget process early indications mean that services will be cut significantly.
Yeah.
We are looking at a budget of about $6 to $7.5 million.
Right.
With revenues of about 9.2, 9-ish, in order just to get back fund balance, so we can look at fiscal 23,
Sure, and
without any further legislative changes.
as I look at that, and I did some amateur accounting, and I'm just amateur enough to be dangerous. But looking at what, assuming expenditures held at expected 2020 levels, which they won't, and assuming our revenue stream remained the same, which it very well could, everybody, I think, is looking very tenuous. Where I see, it looks like we would have a negative fund balance, and again, this is amateurish, but it's gonna be a lot worse. Scott County, it looks like would be doing all right, just because they can now levy at a much higher rate than they have historically, but the rest of the counties look like they'd be hurting quite a bit, and the fiscal agent fund would be, assuming even similar transfers to this year, would be pretty bad off.
Correct.
So what, I mean, and maybe this is more a question for Lynn, what do we do if there is no change? Because some of the legislators I've spoken to say, we might do the sales tax of the penny, the half a penny, the 5/8 of a penny, we might not. Obviously, I don't wanna, we still have to try and provide services regardless of what the legislature does, so what do we do?
Well, I think, let me just explain who I am and why Lori's not available today, and she asked if I would attend. But I do have the same capacity in Jackson County as Felicia does for Muscatine. So I am only here in case Felicia, she's relatively new, it's a hard system to catch up to for a more historical perspective. So what do we do? When regionalization was implemented, legislated, it set apart some core services that are required for every region to have, and as David mentioned earlier, it has to be available to every resident within each region. Those services are pretty much untouchable as far as funding or not funding. There's not any discretionary room there. Then there are some mandated services that every county is required to fund and has been for years. Things like mental health institute bills, possibly some Oakdale bills, things like that. Then in legislation to develop regions, they added additional core services. Those services were a little bit more discretionary. If you had money left over, you could implement them, and if not, you didn't have to. So we have a few of those services in that category. But then there are some services that are fairly costly to regions if they choose to fund them that are not required either through core or even an additional core. The two big ones that come to mind are always sheltered work which has been addressed by the region's governing board in their most recent emergency meeting. And the other one is residential care facilities. That is not a required funded service for any state, for any county or state in the region. Our region has approximately 130 people in that living arrangement. An average cost of stay is probably around $2,500 to $3,000 a month, expense back to the region per person. The challenge becomes when you look at that residential, that living arrangement is, for some of those individuals, where would they live? Or if they lived in a less supervised, less structured setting, what would be some of the implications to the other services in the community? And I'm moving outside a little bit of mental health services. What we know is sometimes mental health crises end in more expensive services through law enforcement, through emergency rooms, through hospitalizations. We have a well-developed crisis system under our contract with Robert Young Center. I think the groundwork is there. We have an excellent continuum of care of services within our mental health region, but there are still going to be some individuals that cannot live in a lesser, that are not successful typically in a lesser setting. So that's one of the challenges, but that's an area that's not required to be funded. We have payee programs, guardianship programs, conservatorship programs, which currently are funded out of Fund 10, out of the mental health fund. Not required services, not even additional core. Is Fund 10 the place where they used to be funded? Did they move into Fund 10 at some point? Those are more individual questions at the county level, but another area where there are expenditures that coming out of the mental health fund would maybe need to be looked at. Again, serious implications to some of those programs not being in place or available. So that's kind of a very high overview of where could you look for additional savings.
No, I think that's something very, to me, I'm pretty familiar with locally our shelters work in some of these residential care programs, and the challenge I have is, I think we know that is the least expensive way to the taxpayer, whatever way you look at it, to manage these folks, because some of the issues are profound enough. They're not gonna be successful in less supervised situations, regardless of what the state law says. Whether they wanna pay for it or not, we're gonna pay for it somehow. It's either gonna be in a crisis service, which none of us wanna see, or it's gonna be in a more controlled environment. And it's really kind of which pockets that money coming out of. So that's an interesting conversation. So it's about $8 million of the, what's my top number here? What's the real number? Is it, I did a little math here, I think we're about $40. Is that about per capita? Is that where you think really our regional expenditures ran through if we fully funded?
So historically, the per capita funding, so as a region, we've moved from $28 per capita funding in fiscal 17 to $32 in fiscal 18, up to $42 in fiscal 19. But that had the $1.3 million worth of one-time funding as a region. So you take off that was about $4 per head at $1.3 million. So it puts you down to about $38. So right now, we're at between that $38 and $42 per head. So I'd go with that $40. If we were to have a different cap for our region, I would hope that we would be near that $40 mark.
Yeah, and I recall back when this regionalization started, they talked about a $55 per capita spend statewide. They wanted to get to there, and I think regionalization has helped things. We're not anywhere near that amount, but I think in Muscatine County, we were probably in the $50 range, weren't we, Sherry, somewhere? We were close to we had to reduce our levy amount slightly, I think, to get to the original per capita drop or something, I don't remember.
But not real significant.
Yeah, we were really close to that statewide average, as smaller counties typically saw that, their per capita levy rate was much higher than some of the larger counties.
There were a number of counties that moved from, there were a couple of counties that dropped from above 47.28 down to 47.28.
Right.
That helped drive that fiscal 15 revenues of $16 million.
have like a 3-year projection, given current legislation,
Well-
where we'll be?
My 3-year projection would be, it's been very difficult, so I would draw you back to these 2 slides here. If I know my revenues are only $9.2 million, and I'm trying to get up to 40% fund balance, or somewhere above 20, or somewhere above 10% fund balance, my expenditures need to be about $6.5 to $9 million in order to rebuild that fund balance and provide services.
But regardless of fund balance, if we just say, so you're saying that our revenues, based on the cap, the per capita cap, we have about 300,000 people, right, at 30?
Yep, yep.
So at $30, that's about
Yep.
9 million and change, 9.2, is that what you're saying the number is? So that's the regional budget we need to be building, forget about fund balance, because that's a cash flow thing.
At the maximum, 9 million, but I think more realistically, in order to give you that funding between July, August, September, and in the also lean months of January, February, you need to, at least for 1 year, you're gonna have to have a lower budget than that $9 million, because you're gonna have to build that fund balance somehow.
Sure.
And so, if we are in that $40 mark, and we had $300,000 people, that could put our budget around $12 million. Well, $12 million is higher than what we have historically, but we also have additional services that are coming online. The
Right.
children's program, a number of services that we haven't fully implemented yet because it hasn't been started yet. And so that $12 million mark may be the right number for this region. You ask for a 3-year budget, that's very difficult when I don't know what some of these services are gonna cost. We can put a placeholder there, we put a placeholder there at one point, $1 million, $500,000. It's a placeholder. Until these services are actually designed and built. And that was part of the problem why we were slow on spending dollars in fiscal 15. We needed to find partners that were willing to commit, not-for-profit partners and hospitals that were willing to commit to the design change, knowing the funding will be there. We've had 5 years of changing funding. And that makes it hard on those partners to say, yes, I'll be here in 18 months because I know you will be.
But I would think it'd be like any product, right, you're gonna create a product, I don't care if it's a widget or a service, you have projections of cost and you have some kind of a feeling anyway of what kind of utilizations, otherwise you wouldn't do it. I mean, you have to build a budget projection and a revenue projection.
Yeah.
Otherwise you can't run a business. So I would think that we would have at least a straw man of those activities, and then we have some history to tell us how accurate we've been. We can always adjust based on that.
And those core services, as Lynn described, those core plus, and other services, those core services are estimated at $6.5 million. So that leaves you under the current method only 2.5 to choose additional core or non-essential services.
And children.
And children's.
So really, the crux of the problem is that the state bodies are saying we should be spending about $6.5 or $7 million a year in this region. And that's what they're allowing us to levy. And what they want those levies built on, and the rest of the funding, they say, is a local decision. And how do you fund it?
Sketchy.
That is all the material I have for you today, but if there's other questions.
Anybody? Anything? David, Lynn, and I'm sorry, Mr. Demon. I heard auditor for Jackson County, but I missed the name.
Yes, I am. I'm Elisa Smith.
Okay, well, thank you guys very much for coming. We really appreciate your time. And the effort I know that you put into generating this and keeping us treading water. Thank you very much, all of you. This time I would, also, I know we've got some service providers here. If they have any comments that they would like to make, I hate for them to think we wouldn't listen to them. So, Mary or Dennis, do you guys have anything you'd like to say? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but.
That's okay. Good morning, everybody. My name's Dennis Duke. I'm president of the Robert Young Center. And, this is a good conversation this morning, and unfortunately, we're in this situation. But it's a complex issue that goes beyond the walls of the Eastern Iowa Mental Health Region. This goes back to 2014, when really the state decided to divest itself in the mental health system. And so some of the choices that Lynn talked about, the regions having to make at some point about reducing services, goes back to the point that there's not an institutional level of care now that's sufficient to meet the needs of not just our region, but all of the regions in Iowa. So that's one complicating factor that we have to deal with. Yes, we need the legislature to lift the caps. That's a given. But we also need there to be some more consideration about the system that was once in place. Not that it has to be exactly what it was, but to complement this regionalization that's occurred, that would put us all in a better position than we are today. I also want to go back to 2015 when we talked about where our caps were set. So the region diligently put together a system. Number one, making sure that there was an investment in the services that were going to be that we're going to provide the kind of services that we need and we know can make a difference. And at the same time, we didn't want to invest in services that there was no way to sustain them from reimbursement, through Medicaid or other pay. So we were in a difficult position. We're trying to balance doing the right thing, thinking of sustainability into the future. And it unfortunately has cost us. And Senate File 504, was about half-baked. It didn't go far enough. And unfortunately, I don't know what the Senate file number is, but the one that requires us, now that we only have to spend 40%. Well, that's too little too late for people who have, done things by the law. So I guess, my ending comment would be, we all know what the root of the problem is for us today, and that is lifting the caps. And so what we can do collectively, we all need to come together to do that with our legislators. But then also, I think we need to take a step back and view this from a bigger picture, and that is really looking at how the regionalization can be better paired with the state mental health system that's in place. And then I guess lastly too, unfunded mandates. We're not in a position, we want to do a lot, we want to do the right things by the consumers, but the unfunded mandates we can't do. And we all are happy that the governor has invested, and made the legislation for a children's mental health system. But I'm not sure, David, how we can go forward with any kind of investment in a children's system that doesn't have any financial sustainability as part of that equation. So, thank you. Any questions for me?
We, again, appreciate you guys coming and for all the work you do for our region. Thank you very much. The agenda item we have is discussion and possible decision. I'm gonna suggest that with the wealth of information David is just trying to download into our brains, that discussion is fine, but maybe we hold off on a decision this meeting unless anybody has a problem with that.
No, I'd like to digest a little bit, maybe have a few follow-up questions. I might email David if that's okay, and some others.
Is there any discussion that anyone wants to have this time?
I just had a question in regards to partners that we normally, you mentioned earlier. Is Robert Young our main provider that we provide funding to? Like, for example, the $6.5 million? How much of that funding goes to them?
So Robert Young Center is the contract holder that then subcontracts out to a number of the hospitals, other not-for-profits that are under the guise of that services. On one slide about even the crisis hotline is even paid through them as well. And although the state's changing that one as well. The contract amount we've matched up their contract year to our fiscal year, and that's now at $4.7 million for fiscal 20. Prior iterations with, as Dennis just mentioned, unfunded mandates, prior iterations of the contracts had less services, but we were building some of these services up in anticipation in order to meet those requirements. And so I think prior contract terms were closer to that 4-ish mark. And so as we've had to build up for these in order to meet those obligations, that contract amount has increased. So For fiscal 20, it's about 4.7. Before the contract amendment. We just did a contract amendment in September, so we dropped about $600,000. So we're back to about, again, 4.1.
When you mentioned earlier about utilization, when I asked you in regards to services that increased, now we're getting more utilization, which is basically, in a sense, you're saying we're getting more patients into the centers, correct? Would that be a true statement? So if we're doing that because we're providing more services, at what point does Robert Young say, hey, you're gonna start seeing an increase of billing, $300,000 more, and the communication then trickles down to us? I mean, did they say 6 months ago, hey, we're seeing increases, or 2 months ago, or hey, last month, we need another $1 million?
No, that communication's happened, it's picked up since July 1 with the new contract. And again, we're only in the middle of October here, so we pay them quarterly. And so that's how it's always been, is that we do a quarterly distribution based upon how much expenses utilization. And so it's the frequency of their draws in order that they get reimbursed. They're the first dollar, and then we're reimbursing for that. And so as they've seen that pick up here, and then we've had a discussion, like, it's that we both made a conscious decision that it wasn't gonna be on that 80 or 90% utilization, it's gonna be on that 90-95% utilization, because things have picked up in the past 6 months that we are still under the contract terms, but you, as a fiscal agent, shouldn't budget off of that prior utilization. You should really be budgeting off of the contract terms. We tried to save some dollars based budgeting off of that utilization, and now that's not working out the way as we expected.
So hypothetically, let's say we approve it, but maybe a couple other counties don't approve it. I'm just throwing that out there. Does it not get to a point where the Robert Young or other partners just say we're not going to be able to provide the services because we know we're not going to get paid?
We would like to work through the legal terms of the contract and cut services or adjust services accordingly in order to, and that's already happened one time, and it may need to happen a second time.
Have we discussed that with Robert Young and saying, could we delay services until we have our physical budget?
So some of these services are actual individuals in hospitals,
Yeah, correct.
and so you can't say, I'm not gonna pay for that contracted person. So we need to, and unless we're gonna make a decision to cut those services or adjust those services. But we have had discussions, and we continue to have discussions about how can we,
Is that at the regional level?
yes, that's at the regional.
I will also say that Robert Young, we had an emergency meeting last month that David has referenced a couple times to cut costs. And Robert Young was very gracious in coming up with a raft of projected cost-cutting measures. Like, was it 500,000-600,000, somewhere in there?
Correct.
So, and so, yes, this is definitely a conversation that's been ongoing with Robert Young, and, they understand and have been cooperating partners in that.
You help me understand, we're paying, we make quarterly payments for services.
Correct.
What's your cost of capital at Robert Young? Are you a private nonprofit, or are you
Can I make a comment? So, so first of all, Robert Young Center, we were contracted by the region to develop, implement, and manage the crisis system, okay? We're also a provider, but our main function in this system is to operate the crisis system. And so most of those dollars coming in, the 4.7 or whatever value that contract is today, that's being distributed among many providers throughout the 5-county region. So it's not just that money coming into it's coming into Robert Young Center. We're kind of like the general contractor, right? And then we pay, the other providers, whether that be in Clinton County or Muscatine County or Scott County, who's actually providing the services. And so, yes, we had the emergency funding meeting last week or last month where we were able to cut services. But this goes back to, again, as a region, identifying the services that we can get the most value of. We purposefully paced it the way we did so that we could implement the services that were going to make a difference, and that we knew we could get paid for by Medicaid, whatever managed Medicaid is going to pay for today, and whatever the regions could provide. We just were, put under the gun with Senate File 504, where it, unfortunately caused us to develop services at a pace that was not going to be sustainable. But the idea of this model is that the behavioral health workforce is the most finite workforce there is in healthcare, and I put it up against any other industry. It's very finite. And the only way that we could do this was to bring together all the providers in the region, including the hospitals, not just Unity Point hospitals, but all our competitor hospitals as well, all for the purpose of making sure we had a system in place that could manage the mental health crisis that we all experience across the region.
Anyone else have any questions or discussion? Once again, a big thank you to everyone who made themselves available. We appreciate your time and your efforts and all that you do. Thank you very much. So, moving right along to item number 7. Action to accept the recorder's report of fees collected for the quarter ended September 30th in the amount of $63,105.84.
So moved. Second.
Jeff has moved, Santos has seconded. All those in favor? Motion passes. Item 8, discussion and possible action to approve the minutes of the October 7th, 2019 regular meeting.
Second.
Scott has moved, Jeff has seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Item number 9, correspondence. Santos?
I had the ribbon cutting for the MPW, basically did an update overall of their last year's budgets and the new year's upcoming. Talked a little bit about the potential transfer line, justification behind it, and still discussions in regards to that not being a completed item, and also a big push for the water tower getting the new logo on there, and that started with one, I believe. So that was a good plus, but it was a good update meeting from Sal and our group. Or not Sal, it was communication. So I have.
Thank you.
Correspondence. I just had a number of contacts on the potential high voltage line coming up. I think that process is moving along. It's slower than everybody likes, but it's a bureaucratic process and it'll take time.
I would say the same thing, and I was at a business after hours and talking to some of the NPW folks about that as well. Scott?
I had a couple calls from residents, conversations. One was in regard to, we've talked about this some previously, about side-by-sides, four-wheelers on gravel roads and being able to do more than just go, currently you're allowed to go farm to farm with them. This individual brought to the point of wanting to expand that to be able to actually travel on gravel roads from point A to point B. And he brought to my attention policies that are in place, I believe, in Wisa, Cedar County both, and others too, possibly. His biggest issue on this was, and I said, in all cases that I'm aware of, people go from point A to point B on currently. I mean, they utilize the roads by my place quite often. But he said, his point being the liability on their behalf, because technically it is not a legal endeavor. And so anything that could happen or may happen would obviously put them at fault on the situation. So maybe that's something that we need to discuss, maybe look at the policies that they have on this in other counties and have a little more discussion on this possibly.
I don't know who sets that policy and who makes that. Keith, can you enlighten, do you, who set, huh?
The board.
So that's within the purveyance of the Board of Supervisors?
It is. What kind of, I mean, how would they get vehicle insurance or stuff like that? I mean, they say they hit another car.
You can't answer that question.
I don't understand how you know that they would offer that.
But, currently you can go farm to farm, that's legal, run farm to farm, same situation.
And I know there are areas and states that allow it, right? They allow them on roads. I mean, I don't know, me personally, I'll give you a personal opinion, if it, meets the criteria for a road-safe vehicle, then I don't have any problem on a road. But it's gotta have lights, it doesn't go speed limit, it's gotta be slow-moving signs and all that stuff. We see golf carts, that's all these kind of vehicles now. They aren't licensed for the road, which, we don't really get road use tax dollars from licensing anyway. I think all the road use tax dollars come from fuel sales, right? And they don't buy off-road fuels, but.
That's just something I think needs to be discussed. I've heard more and more information on that over time. Especially with the advancement of these side-by-sides and that now, it's a long stretch from what they were 20 years ago.
Right. And you see them
Everywhere.
and they're, I view, like in this country, mostly for ag, I see them, but they're, like any other ag vehicle, I see we run tractors down the roads, why don't we run ATVs?
Sure.
You say, I'm not familiar with our policy, maybe we should review that.
I don't know that we currently have.
We have no policy.
Right.
We have no policy,
They just follow state law, or don't follow state law, either one.
and state law says not allowed, period, or?
Except for what Scott has cited, farm to farm.
Well, I think the board of supervisors can designate certain classes of roads, certain very rural counties have designated ATV routes. I don't know how many, there are pretty rural counties that have designated, like small towns do with snowmobiles, that can designate a policy for that.
Yeah, I understand from the conversation I had with this gentleman that different counties have different allowable areas. And generally speaking, they're allowed to travel on gravel roads, aggregate roads, and not hard surface, is generally what I get from the information I received. So, I just think it's something maybe we need to look at a little bit. The other item that I had a call regarding, and I spoke with Keith on this previously, but overhanging and encroaching vegetation on Sweetland Hill just up off of Highway 22. That's all I had.
How about committees?
Committee reports, I did have on Saturday the 12th, Riverbend Transit had their employee appreciation dinner, and there were 5 and 10 year awards given to employees, and it was a well-attended, very nice event. That's all I had.
All I had was the District 7th Judicial District Department of Corrections meeting. We looked at some preliminary budget numbers, but nothing too exciting. Jeff?
I was out last week, so I had, on the 30th of September, I attended a Regional Workforce Investment Board CEO training session put on by IWDNs and consulting groups. And I would say that it's, typical process that had they done that first, I probably wouldn't have supported the protest letter we sent to the feds. Actually, some of the ideas behind this are good and good intention. And so I'm meeting again on the 23rd of this month with another group of the other CEOs in the region to kind of look at the agreements and bylaws and some of that kind of stuff as we kind of prepare to make this transition. So it was a very interesting session. On the 9th, I attended the levy stakeholders meeting here in Muscatine. And on the 10th, we had the MCCJCC, the Muscatine Joint Communications Commission meeting. Really, it was kind of a lot of business cleanup and prepare for the budgeting for the next fiscal year, so.
Santos?
No meetings.
Alrighty. Item number 11 is receive information from county employees. Okay. Item 12 is items with the administration office. A is discussion and possible action to approve a request to hire a building, zoning, and environmental inspector for the zoning and environmental services office.
The hiring form was in your packet. The reason this is coming to you is because Eric is requesting to hire this person above minimum. He's requesting to hire them at grade 8 out of 20. And the rationale behind that is previous experience, and after reviewing the materials, I'm in agreement that this is an appropriate request.
I'll move to approve.
I have a question.
Yes.
How familiar is he with the codes for, pretty familiar with the Florida City Code, or not City Code, but just ordinances and different?
Yes, that's one of the reasons that this candidate was really strong. He's worked as a residential house plan draftsman for multiple area contractors in the past, so he's been designing residential homes under the IRT, as well as a commercial and industrial construction project manager as well, so.
Building codes, things like that.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Has this gentleman worked throughout the county previously?
Throughout the county or for the county?
Throughout the county?
Yes, yes, currently employed by a private
Yeah.
company.
So he's familiar.
Yes.
Good, good. Well, thank you, Eric.
Jeff has moved the approval.
Second.
Santos has seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
It is approved. Item 12B is possible action to appoint Brandy Olson to fill a vacancy on the Muscatine County Board of Health for a term ending December 31st, 2021.
Move to approve.
Jeff has moved to approve. Santos has seconded. We thank Ms. Olson for applying. And all those in favor?
Aye.
She is approved. Anything else, Nancy?
I don't have anything else.
Anybody else have anything they want to get in now? Speak now, forever hold your peace. We're adjourned.